Before Bryan Danielson became a WrestleMania main eventer, before Cash Wheeler became one half of FTR, and before some of today's biggest WWE and AEW stars were wrestling in stadiums, they were appearing in British town halls, leisure centres and holiday camps, sometimes in front of thousands of people, sometimes in front of considerably fewer, and a couple of occasions I was there. Hello everyone, I'm Josh Faulkner, the wrestling comedian. Before we get into it, make sure you drop this video a like and give us a follow. This is 5 future WWE and AEW stars who cut their teeth in British wrestling before reaching the big time. Now, I've deliberately avoided the most obvious names, so there's no Drew McIntyre, no Sheamus, no Wade Barrett and no Paige. Instead, these are 5 wrestlers whose time on the British circuit either launched their careers, transformed them as performers, or prepared them for everything that followed, and we begin with a future AEW Women's World Champion. Coming in at number 5, Jamie Hayter. Long before Jamie Hayter was hitting Haterades on American television, she was learning her craft on the British independent scene. Hayter made her professional debut in 2015 against Ginny and soon became a regular for Revolution Pro Wrestling. This was not a case of somebody becoming famous elsewhere and then coming back to Britain. Britain was where Jamie Hayter was built. She wrestled in smaller venues, developed her hard-hitting style, and gradually emerged as one of the most compelling women on the scene. By 2018, she had defeated Ginny to become Rev Pro's British Women's Champion. She also established herself in Pro Wrestling Eve, winning the 2018 She-Won tournament after overcoming Toni Storm and Chris Wolf in the final stage. That British foundation opened the door to Japan. Hayter joined Stardom, became part of Oedo Tai, and won both the SWA World Championship and the Goddess of Stardom Tag League alongside Bea Priestley. She even appeared on NXT UK in 2019, losing to Piper Niven, before eventually making AEW her home. What makes Jamie such a good example is that she represents the route available to modern British wrestlers today. Learn on the UK scene, test yourself in Japan, then take everything you have developed onto a global stage. By the time wider audiences discovered Jamie Hayter, British fans had already watched her develop for years. Number 4, Finn Balor. Finn Balor may be one of WWE's most recognizable stars today, but Fergal Devitt's wrestling education began much closer to home. Devitt trained with NWA UK Hammerlock and made his professional debut in November 2001. Hammerlock had been founded by Andre Baker and became an important training ground for wrestlers who wanted something more serious than simply learning a few moves and getting onto shows. There, Devitt worked with wrestlers and coaches including Johnny Moss, who later joined WWE as a performance center coach. WWE itself has credited Moss and Hammerlock with helping Finn Balor break into professional wrestling. Devitt toured Britain and Ireland, wrestled regularly for Hammerlock, and won the NWA British Commonwealth Heavyweight Championship. He and Paul Tracy also established NWA Ireland, where they helped train another future WWE megastar, Becky Lynch. Then, after attracting international attention, Devitt was invited to New Japan's dojo. That move transformed Prince Devitt into a major international star, eventually leading to Bullet Club, NXT, and Finn Balor becoming WWE's first ever Universal Champion. But before Japan refined him and before WWE reinvented him, the British and Irish wrestling circuit gave him his foundation. Number 3, Pac. Before he was Pac, before he was Neville, he was a young wrestler from Newcastle called Benjamin Satterley. Pac began training in the Northeast and made his debut in 2004. Those early years were spent working across the British independent circuit, developing the spectacular aerial style that would eventually make him internationally famous. By 2006, he was appearing regularly for IPW UK, receiving an opportunity at the promotion's championship in his debut match against Martin Stone and Leroy Kincaid. He also wrestled for promotions including 3 Count Wrestling and One Pro Wrestling before his work began taking him across Europe and eventually to Japan. It is easy to look at Pac now and assume somebody with that level of athletic ability was destined to succeed, but the British scene taught him something athleticism alone couldn't. How to work different audiences, how to adapt to different opponents, and how to turn spectacular movement into professional wrestling. Dragon Gate sharpened that style. WWE introduced it to a worldwide audience. AEW gave him the freedom to present a darker and more aggressive version of himself, but the foundations were built in British British wrestling's halls. Number 2, Cash Wheeler. Before he became Dash Wilder in WWE and before he became Cash Wheeler, one half of FTR, he toured Britain as Stephen Walters. Wheeler had already been wrestling in America for several years, so Britain did not literally launch his career, but the British circuit became an important part of his education before WWE signed him. During the summer seasons of 2012 and 2013, Walters worked extensively for Brian Dixon's All-Star Wrestling. That meant the traditional British schedule, the town halls, seaside venues, holiday camps, sometimes several shows in a day. He wrestled people including Nathan Cruz, Marty Scurll, Dean Allmark, Robbie Dynamite, Frankie Sloan, and James Mason. He also teamed regularly with fellow American visitor John Schuyler. Records from the 2013 All-Star season show him wrestling in places including Blackpool, Rhyl, Bournemouth, and other traditional touring venues, and I worked on many of those shows with him. At the time, he was just Stephen Walters, a talented American wrestler working Brian Dixon's circuit, doing the same long drives, holiday camps, and town halls as everybody else. There was no guarantee of NXT, no Revival, no WrestleMania, and certainly no FTR, but even then, he was a polished professional who understood the fundamentals. That traditional education makes even more sense when you look at the wrestler he became. FTR built their entire identity around rules, structure, timing, and old-school tag team wrestling. And while Cash had already learned plenty in America, working for All-Star placed him inside a surviving version of the old British touring system. In 2014, WWE signed him. As Dash Wilder, he teamed with Scott Dawson to form the Mechanics, later renamed The Revival. They became the first team to win the NXT, Raw, and SmackDown Tag Team Championships. After leaving WWE, they became Dax Harwood and Cash Wheeler. FTR, one of the most acclaimed tag teams of their generation. But whenever I see Cash Wheeler wrestling on major television now, I remember the American called Stephen Walters working the British summer seasons alongside us. And finally, number 1, Bryan Danielson. Bryan Danielson's connection to British wrestling was far more substantial than many fans realize. Danielson first came to Britain for All-Star Wrestling in 2003. He was already building a solid reputation in Ring of Honor, but he was still years away from becoming Daniel Bryan. In Britain, he sometimes appeared as the Masked American Dragon and occasionally the Dynamic Dragon. He didn't come over for one prestigious independent appearance and then fly home. He stayed. He worked the circuit. Danielson spent 6 months, sometimes more at a time, wrestling across the UK for All-Star, the FWA, WAW, and Premier Promotions. He even entered an 8-man tournament in Croydon and defeated James Mason to win All-Star Wrestling's World Heavy Middleweight Championship. He then returned to Britain repeatedly over the following years, and this meant working the holiday camps. Bryan Danielson has spoken incredibly fondly about wrestling at Butlins. Despite performing in front of enormous crowds at WrestleMania and AEW events, he has described Butlins as one of his favourite places to wrestle, and has even said that under the right circumstances he could happily have done that for the rest of his career. And I actually saw him there. As a kid, I used to go on family holidays to Butlins in Bognor Regis, and I saw him wrestle as the American Dragon. On one occasion, I was the first person in the queue because I wanted to get the best possible ringside seat, and whilst I was waiting, Bryan arrived at the venue and walked straight past me. He'd probably just come from doing another show with Frankie Sloan, but at the time he was simply one of the wrestlers arriving for that evening's entertainment. Years later, that same man would headline WrestleMania, win world championships in WWE and AEW, and become regarded as one of the greatest professional wrestlers of all time. But those Butlin shows mattered. Danielson has explained that British wrestling helped him learn how to perform for families and casual spectators, rather than only dedicated independent wrestling fans. At Butlins, you couldn't rely on an audience knowing your history. You had to establish yourself and your character immediately. You had to make children care, you had to make parents care, and you had to tell a complete story to an audience that might never have seen you before. That's professional wrestling in its purest form, and perhaps that's why Danielson remembers it so fondly. These 5 careers are all completely different. Jamie Hayter was built on the modern British independent scene. Finn Balor emerged through Hammerlock, Pac developed in the Northeast before conquering Japan and America, Cash Wheeler used All-Star's grueling touring schedule as part of his education, and Bryan Danielson learned lessons at Butlins that stayed with him all the way to WrestleMania. Not everybody technically began their career in Britain. Bryan and Cash had already wrestled in America before arriving here, but Britain became part of their formation, and that's why it makes the British circuit so important. It was never just somewhere wrestlers came when they had nowhere else to go. It was a wrestling education. You learned how to work multiple times in one day. You learned to wrestle in front of families. You learned how to adapt when the ring, venue, or opponent was completely different from what you expected. You learned how to hold an audience without relying on television, production, entrance graphics, or 20 minutes of backstory. And sometimes the wrestler entertaining families at a holiday camp would later become a WrestleMania main eventer, or a Universal Champion, or an AEW World Champion, or one half of the greatest tag team of his generation. I feel incredibly fortunate that I didn't just watch some of these wrestlers before they became famous. In Cash Wheeler's case, I shared the same shows with him, and in Bryan Danielson's case, I was that young fan standing at the front of the Butlins queue watching American Dragon walk past without knowing just how far his career would eventually go. But now, it's over to you. What are your memories of seeing future WWE or AEW wrestlers on the British circuit before they became famous, and which wrestler should have made this top 5? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more wrestling stories, opinions, and laughs, you know what to do. And remember, I'll see you on the next one.